in the books. So in keeping with keeping these chapters shorter than what we started off, I'm going to kind of cut through the language portion of this chapter pretty quickly because it's not my favorite. So let's talk about cognition, language, and intelligence. But we're going to skip through language very quickly. All right, so let's start off with the definition of cognition. I've mentioned this word several times, but what is it? Well, we're finally to the point where we can talk about what cognition is. So, cognition is the mental processes. Now, let's stop right there. All right, we're going to really break this paragraph down, right? Notice that that's plural. Mental processes, not the mental process, right? There are certain things here that are, in fact, a mental process, but pretty much everything, when we're talking about cognition, it's a myriad of things that happen together, right? Like none of our senses really occupy a vacuum, right? We don't just see something and none of our other senses are at play, right? We're seeing that. We might also be hearing something, smelling something, feeling something all at the same time, but remember that inattentional blindness, right? We're focused on that one thing that draws our particular attention. So mental processes almost never occur singularly. They're almost always a bunch of things happening at once. It's this vast machine right up here that all these things are happening based on what we direct to need. Does that make sense? So the mental processes that are involved in acquiring, storing, retrieving, and using information. Let's start right there. That's four very distinctive things, right? Is acquiring information different than storing information? Well, think about that, right? These are different components of learning. So acquiring information, some people are very, very good at, right? I could sit down next to you and you're on a computer and I'm on a computer and you could be walking me through let's say like SPSS. If you've taken statistics, you'll know what that is. It's a statistical program that does just a million different things, right? It's very advanced. You can do very difficult quantitative analysis using this particular program. It's like Excel on steroids, basically. So I can sit there next to you and learn SPSS, and you can say click here, I can click there. You can say click there, I can click there. You say highlight this and move it over here, I can do all that, right? So I can acquire that information very, very quickly. Now, a week goes by, and then I sit down in front of my computer and I need to repeat that process, and it's like I've never even seen it before, right? All the tabs look the same. I don't remember what step comes first. I did acquire it. I mean, I followed along. I kept pace with you. But then when it came my turn to do it, I just couldn't follow, right? So there's a difference between acquiring that information and storing it, right? Perhaps it was too many steps occurring too frequently for me to properly, like, really figure out a way to store that information. We're going to talk about the memory chapter coming up soon. So just work with me on this for now. So we're going to store that information slightly different. It's a different part of the brain than acquiring. So acquiring is mostly prefrontal cortex, and storing a couple different components of the brain, right? So they just sometimes people have one is better than the other. Now the reverse is true. It might take some people forever to really acquire a new skill, but once they learn it, they got it, right? They can remember that 6 months down the road. And it's always interesting to me. I took A&P, right? I had to memorize all the bones and the muscles and the nerves and all that kind of stuff. But I just did it because I did it. Like, I'm weird and I take hard classes for fun. But I know I don't need it. I'm not going to use that information. I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm not going to be a nurse or work in the medical field. So, I did it. I got the grade that I wanted, and then I just kind of moved on. So now if you ask me where are all the bones in the foot, I don't remember. Why? I don't care. And it's, again, not because I didn't acquire the information, not that I didn't store it, because I did, not that I can't retrieve it, because, well, I really can't, because, I stored it and then I kind of etch-a-sketched my head and forgot all about that stuff. Now, wife, on the other hand, she took A&P a while back, like a long while back, way before I did, and she still remembers that stuff. And I don't understand why. Like, you don't use it either. How come you retained that information? You stored it better than I did. I'm a much better student than she is, but again, I pick and choose kind of what I remember and, based on whether or not I'm ever going to need that information again. So acquiring information, storing information, very different processes. Retrieving things that are stored, again, very difficult for some people. And then using information. Using is a distinctively different part of the learning process. So I know that I sat through the police academy for 10 months with 37 other people, and everybody passed. Well, not everybody, but that's how many people passed. So everybody acquired the information that they need to understand, to obtain their peace officer license, right? So the acquiring part, they got it. The storing part, well, obviously they got it because they were able to retrieve when they sat down for the exam. So they got the acquiring, storing, and retrieving part. But then they get onto the street and they have to use that information. They have to be faced with a situation, and you're by yourself. I mean, you're with your trainer, but your trainer's kind of in the shadows, right? And you're supposed to be doing the job. And they can't properly apply the law. They know the law, but they can't use the information because it's like theory, like they can recite it on a test, and some of you will notice that in future tests coming up for me, I'm not going to just give you just definitions like this and then you plug in the word, right? That is not really using the information. Like, we're going to talk about, for instance, depression, what is it? And then you might see a test question that's going to say something like, Bob has trouble getting out of bed in the morning. He feels hopeless and tired all the time, and he's lost interest in all of his normal activities. What might he be experiencing? Well, that would be depression, right? If you're given a list of like depression or anxiety or different choices to pick, right? You're using the information. We've talked about what depression is, but in no point in that particular test question did I give you the definition, right? I gave you pieces of it, and you had to put it together and apply that information, right? So again, back to our very long definition here: acquiring information, storing information, retrieving information. That's basically learning and memory, and then using information. And that include sensation, perception, we've talked about those, imagery, concept formation. So this is like creativity. Again, this is kind of using information, spinning it in a new way, right? Creating new concepts, reasoning, decision making, problem solving, and language. So all this second half is kind of what this chapter is about. All right. So very long definition, but that's because cognition is a very umbrella term that encompasses quite a few different things, each of which could be broken down. Hell, you could have an entire class on most of this stuff. So lots and lots and lots of stuff packed into that one particular definition. So imagery is a mental representation of a sensory experience. Now, usually when we talk about imagery, we are thinking visual, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind, right? Imagine, right? Imagery, imagine. So usually you're picturing something in your mind's eye, right? So here's Homer Simpson, right? And we think of imagery, we think of donuts, right? And so what do we see? Well, we see a picture of a donut, but that's a little bit misguided because imagery is any sensory experience. So I can say, hey, you remember when we went to that concert and they played that one song that you really liked that really like moved you? Maybe it was like not like a Metallica concert, but maybe it was like maybe a Christian concert or something, and you felt overwhelmed when you heard one particular song, right? So you would close your eyes. Well, you're not picturing what the stage looked like. You're not picturing that singer that was this big, right? Because you had the cheap seats. You're reliving that sensory experience, right? Which is an auditory thing. So you might close your eyes even, and then you might remember what it sounded like and the crowd that was singing along with the song and whatnot. So imagery can be visual, it can be auditory, it can be gustatory, it can be motor, olfactory, or tactile. Remember, olfactory is smell, motor is tactile, tactile is, so what we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we actually have 6 here. So all 5 of our senses is essentially what I'm getting at. All right, here's the part that I'm going to skip through kind of quickly. It's just not my forte, honestly. Can't be an expert on everything, and this is one of the things I don't particularly care about, even though I was an English teacher for an entire year. I hated that job. It is the worst 9 months of a job I've ever had, and let me tell you, I've had a lot of jobs. So, yeah, I guess this maybe hits a PTSD point for me, and I just don't like talking about it too much. So language, let's talk about that just briefly on this one slide. So grammar are the rules of language. So here's the thing about that. I'm kind of a grammar Nazi. Good thing I don't make y'all write a paper for me because most people would not do very well. I've seen that most people cannot write very well. Very few people seem to have a command of the English language. I did have one student write me an email recently, kind of introducing herself, and I was blown away by how well it was worded. And I let her know that, and you know who you are. Very impressive to me, right? So I have a great amount of respect for people that are able to sort of still command the English language properly, right? But why does that seem to be going by the wayside? Well, listen to the music of the day. I mean, I ain't got no, that kind of stuff, right? I mean, that's not the English language, right? So there's an argument to be made that English is a constantly evolving thing, right? So when we think of like proper English, when we think of like those uptight Englishmen that speak very eloquently and all that is kind of old school, right? And the new school is much more laid back. It includes more slang and things like that. I guess it just depends. I mean, do you want to go to a doctor on a serious issue and show him, some infection? He goes, "Oh, damn, yo, man, that's some shit, dude." Do you want to go to a doctor that does that? Because it doesn't, for me, command a lot of respect, and it doesn't make me think, "Oh, this guy's probably very good. Did you go to Harvard?" Like, I don't think that, right? So I feel like, you represent yourself by how you speak. And, when I go to a doctor, I expect for him to say doctor things. I want him to use $5 words. I want him to use, 10-syllable long words that I don't understand. And I have to ask, "Oh, I'm sorry, what is that?" I want that because I want to go in and feel like I'm here, intelligence-wise, and he's here. Because he can fix my problem, right? But if I go in and I speak better than the doctor, then I'm kind of leaving and going, "Nah, I'm going to YouTube this. I'm going to WebMD this. I don't trust you," right? So, again, I have kind of my own thoughts on grammar and speaking properly. But I will, again, I know it's not a great quality that I might have, but there are people that will open their mouth and talk, and I instantly think, I don't want to know them. I don't want to be their friend. I don't want to be fucking friggin' kind to them, nice to them, like nothing. See, here I am, nothing, right? So, grammar is what it is to you. Everybody kind of probably has their own thoughts about it. So, breaking down the English language, phonemes are specific sounds that letters make. So, phonemes is what you teach to like your 3-year-old, right? Like cat or ball, right? That is teaching them phonemes, right? That's the sound that letters make. Morphemes are the manner in which phonemes come together to form words. So this is how you break down not letters like phonemes, but you put them together into a word. Cat, the A is cat, right? That's teaching morphemes, right? Semantics are what words mean. So this was interesting. A bit of a grammar Nazi. When I first started dating the girl that I'm with, all right, she's Hispanic, and English is actually not her first language, but you wouldn't know that speaking to her because she speaks perfect English, no accent whatsoever. But there would be times that she would say things early on that, I would split hairs and it would bother me. And she would say something like we talk about social media, like should we have social media? Is that a proper thing to have, right? I mean, exes look you up and send you private messages, and you have a window into their life to be able to look them up, and they have a window into yours if your stuff is set publicly. And so, I don't want it. I don't have social media. I haven't for a long time, and I don't miss it. And I think it's the worst thing ever, right? For tons of reasons. So we had this conversation, and it had become a problem in our relationship and in most of her previous relationships. And so it was kind of time to talk about it. And she would say something like, "I don't really need it." Okay, that's kind of a big deal. Like, I can say, "I don't need it. I don't need it. I don't want it. I'm fine without it." But when you say, "I don't really need it," that word "really" means I kind of need it, but I could live without it. So it's probably annoying to talk to me, right? Because I will split hairs with you, and if you're like, "Oh, well, I don't really need that," yeah, I don't want to feel like I'm making you take that down, right? Like, I want us to have a conversation and be on the same page. I don't feel like it's necessary, and I don't want it. You obviously think you want it a little bit, but I guess I could live without it. And I don't want that. I don't want to feel like I'm telling you what to do. I don't want to feel like I'm being controlling or anything like that. So we just don't see eye to eye. And then she would say, well, I just said I don't really need it. I'm like, yeah, but you said it again. I don't really need it. So semantics, what words mean, right, are kind of important, but you kind of have to take into account that person's background, right? Are they English being their second language? Maybe they didn't really learn semantics as well as you or I. Maybe they weren't an English teacher. Maybe they haven't studied psychology and understand that sometimes we interject into our language certain tones or certain words that are really articulating our feelings more so than we think we are, right? So again, don't probably ever date me and have a conversation with me because I'll drive you up the wall. Syntax is when morphemes properly come together to form sentences. So phonemes is for letters, morphemes is for words, and syntax is for sentences, basically. Okay. One time I had 109 students whenever I was an English teacher. And by the way, all my classes were remedial. I don't know why they gave me all the remedial students, but they did. So one time I gave an assignment. I want you to write 3 proper sentences with no mistakes whatsoever. And that is grammatical mistakes, punctuation mistakes, spelling mistakes. And I'm a terrible speller. So if I was to be given that, I would say, my dog is brown, period. My cat is nice, period. I would have the simplest, dumbest sentences that I can't possibly misspell anything or get wrong. Do you know, out of 109 students, how many people do you think, 10th graders by the way, how many people do you think gave me 3 sentences without a single mistake? It was like 12. 12 people out of 109 could give me 3 sentences with no mistakes. I would get stuff like, I'd be going to my grandma's house a lot, or stuff like that. So what is the problem there? Well, that's not the rules of language, right? Their grammar is way off, right? So anyways, language development. Now let's talk about that real quick, and I'm dragging on longer than I want to, but real quick, what about this whole, and I can't call it Ebonics anymore, but that used to be what it was called, right? There was a big push for the black community to kind of have their own language, and they try to call it Ebonics. And they wanted it to be okay to say something like, oh, that's, okay, I hear this a lot, right? This particular phrase bothers me. The word mine, that is mine. That is how it's spelled, M-I-N-E, that's it, right? And what do you hear from the black community? You hear, that's mines. They put an S on it. Inexplicably, they put an S on that. I don't know why. The other one is, apparently they don't like the word scared. So instead of the word scared, they say scary. Well, those are very different words. They're used differently. So you might say, yeah, he put a gun in my face and I was very scared. But what you'll hear a lot is they put a gun in my face and I was scary. Wait, so they put a gun in your face, but you were the one that was frightening to the person with the gun? The meaning is completely different between scared and scary. They put a gun in my face and I was scary. I don't understand how that happens, but it's so prevalent in that community that that's normal for them. And so when they speak, they understand each other perfectly. But then, and you know, when you're around it for a while, then you can kind of decipher it and understand it here. But now we have 2 different versions of a word in the English language, both speaking English, sort of, that this community has kind of adopted it, changed it, and made it their own a little bit. Well, how does that work? So can we just take whatever word we want and just spin it in any kind of way? And I'm not trying to pick on that community, right? It's just because I worked in that community for quite some time that I picked up on that. If you put me in any other community, you put me in a Chinese community, you put me in whatever Asian, not Asian, Hispanic community, there would be plenty of words like that, right? That they sort of tweak a word and change it and make it their own or whatever. So now we have culture-specific rules of grammar, culture-specific semantics, culture-specific syntax, right? They pronounce words, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but different sort of ethnicities will have kind of a different syntax because in their language, their primary language, like especially like for Hispanics or Asian, they don't have any morphemes that sound like our morphemes. So whenever they're trying to use our language, they're still sort of using their rules for morphemes, and they don't sound like ours. They don't pronounce them the way that we pronounce them. Um, it gets the study of language does get more interesting whenever you start to look at it from a multicultural perspective, right? Because it's much more complex whenever you add in the different rules that are brought forth by the different cultures. So that is the one thing about studying language that I do think is a little bit interesting. But other than that, this is more for the education field and less for the psychology field, in my feeling. Overgeneralization is failing to understand exceptions to these rules. So there, in the English language, of course, there's always a million rules, right? So like even sounding things out, right? Like comb, C-O-M-B, comb. Okay, T-O-M-B, tome? No, that's a tomb. Oh, okay, spelled the same except for the first letter, but the rest of it sounds confusing. Okay, what about B-O-M-B? Bohm? No, that's bomb. Comb, tomb, and bomb. Completely sounding different, right? Different syntax or different, I guess that would be different morphemes, right? But they're essentially the same except for the first consonant. So overgeneralization is failing to understand the exception to the rule, which in the English language has more of them than any other language. That's why they say that English is the hardest language to learn, by the way. So yeah, that's about as much as I'm going to go into that stuff, which again is more than I really wanted to. But I had a Red Bull this morning, if you can't tell, and so I'm like, rah! All right, so skipping on. All right, problem solving. Problem solving, this is something that's more interesting to talk about in a philosophy class than a psychology class. And it's also something that's interesting if you can really dive deep into it. But since this is an intro class and we can't, again, unfortunately, we kind of scratch the surface on this, and it's probably not stuff that makes a whole lot of sense by the time it's all said and done. So, different kinds of ways to solve problems. Well, of course, there's the trial and error method. You just guess until you get it right. So, if I tell you, go in here and I can't remember the password, but it has something to do with like the capital of Germany, right? Whatever. So you're going to type in, what's the capital of Germany? I don't know. Is it Paris? Nope, that's not it. Is it Albuquerque? If you're terrible at geography, no. Berlin. Oh yeah, I'm in. That would just be trial and error, right? Now, if there's no penalty for that, then why not do that? It's quick and it's easy for the most part. It may not be quick, but it's definitely easy, right? It doesn't require a tremendous amount of thought. Now, what if I told you you get 3 tries and then you're locked out permanently? Then you're probably not going to use the trial and error method because there's a consequence for it, right? Trial and error is mostly used when there are no consequences for getting it wrong. Now, there's not a ton of situations in like your work environment, perhaps, that you can get that right. So this is, again, used only sort of for small decisions that are inconsequential. The algorithmic method is a step-by-step problem-solving formula. So this is when I would give you a recipe and say bake a cake, and you've never baked a cake in your life, right? But you can follow these step-by-steps and solve the problem. The problem is I have to bake a cake and I don't know how to do it, right? So if I give you a recipe that just has the ingredients, you probably still don't know how to do it. That's not going to help you, right? But if I give you a recipe with instructions, right? Put your flour in a bowl, put your sugar in a bowl in these proper proportions, put 3 eggs, put a certain proportion of oil. You're going to beat it for a certain amount of time and on a certain setting until it gets to a certain consistency. You're going to spray your pan. You're going to put that. Can you tell I bake? So if I work you through the problem, right, then that's an algorithmic method, right? You're just basically following step-by-steps. So you're solving a problem, but and that doesn't always have to be something that's given to you, right? I might give you, since we're talking about food because I'm hungry, I might give you a certain dish and ask you to deconstruct that. And if you have kind of basic fundamentals of culinary science down, you probably could do that. You could say, okay, well, there's this ingredient, whatever that might be, and it looks like this was sautéed. So okay, well, I got that done. And then these other components are this, and it looks like this was chopped and then steamed, and it looks like this was. And so you could work backwards to the starting products, right? and you can get all those vegetables and all those proteins, whatever they might be, and you've sort of seen the end product, and you kind of know, okay, well, I need to steam this one and saute this one and, do whatever with this one, and then put it all together and give you that same end product. So that would be kind of another example of an algorithmic method where you're either step by step solving a problem or perhaps working backwards. Sometimes the steps are given to you. Sometimes you have to kind of ascertain for yourself, well, what needs to come first. So if you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle, right, you start with the corners, then you start with all the straight edge pieces, right, and you build the border, and then you work inside the border, right? That would be kind of a step-by-step. Nobody told you to do that, but if I just gave you a puzzle and said build it, you would probably pretty soon figure out that that is kind of the easiest method to get started. So that's an algorithmic method. Now, a heuristic method is interesting. A heuristic method is just a general problem-solving formula. We use heuristics, and I think it's on the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So heuristics is a rule of thumb that is derived from experience and used in decision-making and problem-solving, even though there's no guarantee of its accuracy or usefulness. So we talked briefly about your brain using a tremendous amount of energy, right? Well, your brain knows that. And believe it or not, your brain kind of doesn't really want to be selfish. So any opportunity it has to be efficient and use less energy, it does. So in other words, our brains are a little bit lazy, right? When we're faced with a situation, if we've had a similar situation in the past, it's easy to go, oh yeah, I've run into this before, this is what I did. And we just make a decision, right? Now, is it always accurate? Well, no, it's not, because I don't care how simple the situation is, there are different circumstances, right? If you really break it down, things that affect this decision, there are probably extenuating circumstances that are different than the first time you encountered it. This happens a lot in relationships, and if you do any kind of relationship counseling, what you'll see is people carry baggage, right? People are burned, they're hurt from previous relationships, and they learn from that this is not okay. So like, for instance, is it okay to be friends with your exes? You have a relationship with somebody, it goes sideways, you realize you're not a good match, so you break things off. And there are a lot of people out there that decide, you know what, I want to remain friends. I've invested years of my life into this person and it didn't work out. We realize we're not a good match as far as, being married or, going forward down that road, but they're a great person. I really like talking to them. I have a very strong feeling for them still, even though I would never act on it. So I want to stay their friend. Now, everybody's got their own opinion on this as to whether or not that's acceptable or proper or whatever. I'm going to tell you mine. I think it's stupid. I think it is, I just believe in leave and cleave, right? Didn't work out, sorry. I wish you the best. I'm out. You no longer exist to me. It helps me deal with it emotionally better, and more so than that, is it because I already have closure if I'm leaving, but more so than that, I want there to be no issues going forward. I don't want to try to rekindle an old flame. I don't want the person that I'm with being in that situation. You get into a big fight with your significant other. Who's the person that they're going to go crying on the shoulder to? The person that they used to be with? I don't want to drive that. I don't want to be worried about that all the time. So a heuristic would be, you meet somebody new and you say, hey, look, I've found a thing about not being friends with exes. Do you have any? And they go, oh, yeah, well, one. I'm friends with one of my exes still. And you go, nope, I'm out. And you go on to somebody else. Now, is that fair? Not really. I mean, just because in general you don't think that that's a good idea because maybe your ex went back to their ex, and so you think, well, I learned from that. I'm never going to go down that road again. It doesn't mean that your new ex is going to do the same thing, right? So, is that heuristic problem-solving method accurate? Well, we'll never really know unless you went through it and got burned a second time. But in all likelihood, no, it's probably not accurate. But we rely on it heavily, don't we? Right? So when do we use these? When there's too much information, right? Again, our brains are lazy, right? It doesn't want to digest all of that information, think through every possible scenario and every possible consequence, and then make a decision. That's a lot of work. So your brain's like, okay, no, that's too much information, so I'm just going to make this decision, right? Now, the reverse is true. I don't have enough information. I don't really know enough about this to make a decision. So at my current job, this probably is gonna sound a little conceited, but I am by far better educated. Nobody on my shift has a college degree. None. Nobody. I have 5. So I'm a little overqualified, right? So they were running into all kinds of problems yesterday. I mean, just all kinds of shipping and receiving issues and supply chain issues, logistics issues, everything, right? So my supervisor's boss's boss, however many levels up the ladder that is, right, has heard a little bit about me. I've made a little bit of a name for myself. And so he came to me and he said, hey, what do you think we should do? And I was like, well, I mean, I think it would make sense if we did this. And then I offered a few suggestions, right? But then he asked me a horrible question. He said, hey, I want your opinion on something. Just between you and I, what is your opinion on my immediate supervisor? And I said, oh, I couldn't offer that. And he goes, no, I really want to hear. I mean, do you think he's really cut out for this? And I said, look, honestly, I don't know enough about the job to make that qualified decision. I know what I do, and I know some of the things that I see him do, but I'm off on the other end of the building doing my own thing 99% of the night. I'm only around him 1%. So, I mean, I've seen him make decisions that I don't particularly agree with, but he might know things that I don't know. So I don't have enough information to really give you that. And it's not that I'm afraid to tell you what I think, because if you know me, you know I'm not, ever. But I simply don't have enough information to really make a qualified decision on that. It's like asking me, what did I think of a movie, and all I saw was the trailer. I can tell you with the trailer whether that was good or not, but I can't tell you about the movie. So that's kind of with heuristics what happens, right? We have too much information. Sometimes we just snap judgment and say, well, this is what I would do because it's quick and it's a shortcut. The same has happened when you don't have enough information to really make a good quality decision, but yet you have to make one. You just heuristically make a decision. When time is short, that makes sense too. I don't have time to think through an answer. You need something like that, right? And so again, I'll bore you with a law enforcement thing. You're in a situation where you are faced with a life and death, a person with a knife, person with a gun, whatever, or a person that is making decisions that are not particularly rational, right? They're screaming, they're yelling, they're saying all this kind of stuff. You're a police officer, you're telling them to, let me see your hands, all that kind of stuff, and they're not acting in a way that you would expect a normal person to act. You've drawn down on them. You're pointing a weapon at them. They don't even care. They're not like, oh my God, a weapon, right? They're seeing that and they act like it doesn't even exist. And they're still hollering and yelling. And all of a sudden they go into their jacket and they come out pointing at you and they get shot. And people want to know, well, why did you shoot him? He didn't even have a gun. Well, I didn't have enough time to... What is he doing? Okay, he's bringing something out of his hand. I don't know what it is. Oh, that's a cell phone. Oh, let me refrain. You don't have time to do that, right? Because if it is a gun, they are now shooting at you, and you are shooting back. And let me tell you something. I don't ever want to be in a gunfight where I don't get to shoot at the same time or before, right? I don't want to have a hail of bullets coming my way and then try to take aim and fire, right? I'm going to go home tonight. So that's what happens a lot of times, and when you see these cases broken down in court, you see that based on the totality of the circumstances, right, based on the general manner in which the suspect was acting, based on the officer's experience and how normal people act versus homicidal or suicidal people act, the heuristic decision was made because time was short. In a fraction of a second, you have to make that life or death decision. And again, self-preservation kicks in, training kicks in, experience kicks in. And unfortunately, we have far too many officer-involved shootings these days because they're forced into a situation where they're making a heuristic decision instead of a problem-solving situation. I tell you this, on my very first day on training, right? First day I'm actually on the streets. We had this weird call that was CPS, and they had a new CPS worker that basically bungled her job badly. They had a removal order, and they were going to go to this house and remove this lady's children because she was mentally, she had problems. And so instead of going and doing that, because they had the court order, they called her to see if she would be home. And when she answered the phone and said yes, they told her what they were going to come do and said, we'll be there in a minute. And the lady was talking, and she started kind of, acting weird and saying some weird things. And then she said, I have to go. My mind ain't right, and hung up the phone. So now the CPS worker clues in. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. And they called 911, and they wanted us to do a welfare check. So my trainer and I get to the house, and her door was open, and her screen door was shut, and she had a butcher knife about that long. I don't even own a knife that big. What do you even do with a knife that big, kitchen knife? And she's sitting on the counter, on the couch, and she's holding this knife like this, and she has an infant in her arms. And I'm like, oh, wow. So I have some decisions to make, right? Is that baby in harm's way? Absolutely, right? Can I just draw down and shoot her? I mean, technically, possibly. I mean, she's basically holding a knife to a baby, and it's documented that she's, mentally has I don't know the right word to say. My brain's not working right, but she has issues, right? So I have to say I'm very proud of the way that I handled this, especially being a rookie. Going back with all my years of experience, I don't think I could have really handled it much better. I just basically, and it was a little bit of luck, right? This could have gone badly, but I just basically acted like I didn't see the knife. And I knocked on the door, and I opened the screen door to make sure that I could get to her in a heartbeat if I needed to, and I could. But I stayed in the doorway. I didn't want to alarm her. And I kept a very friendly tone, and I was like, hey, ma'am, how are you doing today? I'm Officer Hageman, Police Department. I was like, hey, listen, we were sent to come check on you. Apparently you were on the phone with somebody. I'm not sure who it was, because I don't want her to know that I know the situation. I don't want her to know about CPS and that I know that you're about to lose your children, right? So I said, you're on the phone with somebody, and they got disconnected, and they were really worried about you. We're not here in a police capacity. We just want to check on you because we're in the area. So is everything okay? And no response. So, once again, I said, hey, listen, are you okay? They were kind of worried about you, and they were worried about, I guess, whoever else is in the household. Could you tell me who else is here? Again, no response, right? But I'm concerned because she has 3 kids, and I only see the one that she's holding, and I don't know about the other 2. So I said, okay, well, listen, I tell you what, would you mind if I came in and just checked your phone, and if it's working, I'll just set it next to you, and then I'll leave, and that way, if you want to make a phone call, you can. Would that be okay? No response. So very slowly, I step in, and I was like, okay, ma'am, where do you keep your phone? No response. And it's right next to her. I can see it, right? But I pretend that I don't, and I say, listen, would you mind if I step to the back and look for your phone so I can give it to you and be out of your hair? Would that be okay? Again, no response. So now I go in the back of the house, but really what I'm doing is checking for the other kids. Well, there are no other kids. Apparently they're in school, so we're good there. So the only person I have to worry about is this baby, right? So when I come back in, and I'm only gone for a couple seconds, she had set the baby next to her, and now she's sitting here like this. And she just has the knife still, but the baby is kind of next to her on the couch. So I said, okay, listen, let me bring you this phone, and then I'm going to set it down, and then I'll be out of here, okay? Would that be all right? No response. So I set the phone down, and I mean, as quick as I could. I thought about going for the knife, but then I thought, I don't really want to get in a struggle with her. I don't know how strong she is. Maybe she's a ninja, I don't want to. I really don't want to chance that at this point, not in this close proximity. I don't want to be fighting next to this baby with a knife involved, right? So I decide that the best thing to do is to set the phone down and try to grab the baby, right? And in the worst case scenario, I can grab and turn, shield the baby, something like that. So that's what happens. So I grab the baby and I turn and I get away, and she never budges. So I go to the door and I hand the baby to my trainer, and I'm like, here, take the baby. And then I turn back around, and now I know it's just me and the suspect, right? The lady that needs help. So now I'm in there, and again, she hasn't moved, and I'm trying to talk her into dropping the knife, and she won't do it. And I'm trying to decide, maybe if I take my baton, maybe I can whack it out of her hand. Do I go spray and try to spray her? This is just before tasers came out, so that wasn't an option. So I'm going through like my options, but I'm just not really making a decision yet. And the next thing I know, she stands up and she starts going, "You're gonna have to kill me!" And she starts swinging like this, but she's walking slowly towards me. And I backed up, back is against the wall, and I really didn't leave myself a good exit. That's probably the one thing I didn't do well, is give myself a good exit strategy. So I drew down on her, and I was right between her eyes with my weapon, and I said, "Lady, I don't want to kill you." And she stopped and looked at me, and just for a brief second, I think she thought about it and was like, "Yeah, I don't really want to die right now either." And I said, "All I want to do is get the hell out of your house. Please step aside, and I will leave." And she didn't move, but I sure did. So I ran to the back because I couldn't get to the front because of the angle. She was closer to the door. So I went to the back door, and I ran into the backyard and slammed the door. And I'm like, "Oh, thank God that's over." And then I looked down, and there was the biggest pit bull I've ever seen, waking up from a nap, looking at me like, "What are you? Who are you? What? I think I will eat you now." So I had to run through the backyard and jump over the fence away from the dog. That was miserable. But anyway, so we had a barricaded person for a little while, and we ended up talking her out. But I look back at that, with some fondness. The situation resolved itself, and nobody got hurt. I did not make the decision to shoot her, even though they train you 21 feet. If somebody's got a knife and they're within 21 feet, that's lethal force. And she was about 6 feet. And I thought, worst case scenario, I'll take a cut. I think I'm agile enough, and I know what I'm doing enough that I can take a laceration and it won't kill me. Plus, it'll be a cool scar and a cool story to tell. But if it means me taking a laceration in order to wrestle this knife away and save a human life, I think that's worth it. That's kind of what I signed up for. So, not everybody has the presence of mind to think that quickly, to think things through that well, to think consequences when you're at the peak of human emotion. I mean, your adrenaline is just surging. You got all this stuff going on, all these what-if scenarios. And plus, I was 24. I felt like I was pretty invincible at the time. So would I do the same now at, in my 40s? Maybe not. That was also before I had children. So that did change my perspective a lot. So, when we think about decision making, there's just so much that comes into it. Training and life experiences and circumstances, they just change for every different decision. Even a similar decision. So I've been faced with somebody with a knife on more than just that one occasion. And, did I think it through all the steps like I did on the other times? No, because the situation was different. I didn't have a lady that was basically catatonic as I did the first time, which gave me the time to think it through. And other times it was a much more dynamic situation. The person was much more active, much more agitated, and I didn't necessarily have the amount of time, so I had to make, kind of a much quicker decision. So, heuristics is an interesting thing because we tend to rely on them heavily, although they're usually not very accurate. That's heuristics. Other cognitive stuff. Framing, this is the favorite for PR people and headline writers. It's the way information is presented as to emphasize either a potential gain or a potential loss. So let's say that there's a school bus that gets into a wreck and catches on fire, and there's 100 kids in this bus. And a police officer rolls up on scene, and he's able to get half of them out and save them before, unfortunately, it explodes and we lose the other half, right? So you have two newspapers, and one says, through the heroic actions of this police officer, 50 students were saved from a fiery death. We're going to hail him as a hero, right? We're going to have a parade. He's going to be on Oprah, right? Now, a different newspaper, same situation, and they say, a police officer with no medical training tried to step in, and unfortunately, due to his inexperience, 50 students met an untimely death. It's the same situation, right? But we spin it toward focusing on the people that he saved in the first one and the people that died in the second one. So this is what happens with headlines, right? And this is what's going on with Trump. And I don't at all follow politics, and I could give a crap who's the president because they all pretty much lie and suck. Some are just more, sneaky and underhanded at it. So, I don't have a lot of good things to say about any politician, but that is what happens. Whatever Trump does gets spun in the most negative light possible and put in headlines, right? Because pretty much everybody hates him. Even his supporters realize he's kind of a jerk, right? He might do things that other people don't do, and some of them are even good things, but he doesn't get good press ever, right? When's the last time anything positive was ever said about him? So that's what framing is. Intuition, rapidly formed judgment based on gut feelings or instinct. I think I've previously mentioned this before. Who do you think has better intuition, men or women? Most people agree women, right? Women's intuition. You never hear, yeah, that's a man's intuition. Like that's not even a thing, right? That's not even a phrase. So yeah, women are generally better at it. And why is that? Well, because we're talking about feelings. Who's better at, who's got a higher emotional intelligence? Usually women. Women are usually better at regulating their emotions. Now, I know that sounds crazy, right? Because they're the ones crying at movies while guys are keeping it in, right? That's not because we're regulating, right? We're just repressing. Like, women can let it out. They're okay with that. It's socially acceptable. So, so yeah, women typically have better intuition than men. They're a little bit more in tune with their emotions. They're a little less afraid to show them. So they have really good instincts for things. I know I've talked to a lot of people that don't consider themselves cheaters, but they have stepped out on occasion, texting a girl or emailing or whatever, and it's like, man, my girl checked my phone out of the blue and caught me. I don't know what tipped her off. We've heard this a million times, right? It's just that woman's intuition. They know that little different thing that you act, or you're acting just a little, you don't feel like you're acting any different, but it's just subtle enough that they pick up on it and they're checking your phone, right? So intuition is both people can have it, right? I mean, guys can have intuition about certain things, but I think women are a little more in tune with it. Okay, anchoring is the overestimation of the importance of a particular factor at the exclusion of other relevant factors. So, used car prices. I worked in the car industry for exactly 2 weeks. I did training for a week, and I sold one car and did okay with that. And then the second car I went to sell, the finance manager made me take the guy to the cleaners and sell it at a much inflated price than what I should have been able to sell it for, because he knew the guy was a sucker, and he was. So I decided, yep, I don't like this job. I don't feel like that's particularly ethical. I know you're thinking, oh, we made money off of them and it's a business and, whatever, but I feel like it was taking advantage. So I did not like that. But I can say from the brief time that I spent in that industry that, used car prices, right? They will set a price for whatever that car is, and they will focus on that price, right, to some extent. So you come in and you say, okay, well, Kelley Blue Book says this car is worth $8,000. And you have it priced at $9,000. And so the dealership says, I tell you what, I'll sell that car to you for $7,500. We really like you. And so you go, oh my God, that's $500 less than Kelley Blue Book. That's a great deal. I'm going to buy it. Well, never mind the fact that it's got 200,000 miles on it. Never mind the fact that it's got scratches and dents all over it. Never mind the fact that it smells like tuna fish for some inexplicable reason, right? So, you're so focused on one factor, being price, which typically is what people are focused on when they're buying a car, that they're not thinking about the totality of everything else. And this car is a piece of crap, right? Sort of a better example with the prices is the trade-in. So you go and you say, yeah, I have a trade-in, right? So it's $8,000 car. They say, oh, we'll sell it to you for $9,000. You say, no, that's not okay. They say, well, I tell you what, we'll give you $2,000 for your trade-in. So now it's not a $9,000, it's a $7,000 car. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, turns out you probably could have gotten $4,000 for that car and still bought that car for $8,000. But you got less for your trade-in and more, because what they're doing is they're adding more things because it confuses most people, right? Most people can't juggle these two different pieces of information, and they use this one against this one, and they are really, really good at that, and that's not something you deal with very often. So you get suckered on both ends. You get screwed on the overall price of the car, and you get screwed on your trade-in value. So that's anchoring. Let's see. Confirmation bias, selective attention to information that confirms pre-existing beliefs about the best way to solve a problem. So this is when you have an idea in your head, and I'll tell you one thing that's really bad with this is internal affairs, right? Internal affairs sucks. And I've had several friends that left patrol just to get out of patrol. Took the first job that, first detective position they could get, which was internal affairs, which looks really good on your resume to move around to other detective positions, but you like instantly lose perspective, right? So you get on the other side of things where now you're investigating cops. And I'm not saying cops don't do things wrong, and I'm not saying cops will step out of line and shouldn't get in trouble. They should. I've been investigated 8 times. And 8 times it was inconclusive because it was minor stuff. It was none of it was major. But I had a guy one time that had a brain tumor, and he had this weird behavioral thing going on where he would be like normal, and then he would start yelling, and he would blah 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 blah, and then he'd go back to this and talk, and it was just, you just kind of had to weather the storm, right? And I talked to his wife. She told me it was a medical condition. I didn't take it personal. The issue at hand was between him and a neighbor, and it was not a police issue. There was no crime being committed. They just weren't getting along. So I tried to mediate as best I could. And again, he'd start screaming and yelling at me and all that kind of stuff. And I just kind of, okay, listen, I'm trying to help you here. And, we'd go back and we'd make a little progress. Then he'd start screaming and yelling, and I'd have to wait a second. And this went on for like 30 minutes. And then finally he starts telling me, "You're just not helping me because you white." Blah, blah, blah. And I don't have a lot of tolerance for that. I've been very nice to this guy, very polite, very professional. And so, again, without any emotion, I said, "Okay, sir, I've spent 30 minutes trying to help you with this situation. And this is not even a police issue, okay? So I really should have left 30 minutes ago. But again, I know what it's like to live next to a neighbor you don't get along with, and it sucks. So I'm trying to help you. But listen, if you're going to play the race card, I'm out, okay? I'm not going to sit here and be called a racist while I've spent 30 minutes helping you on a problem that's not even my problem." And he just kept yelling, and I said, "Sir, you have a nice day." And I left. Well, he called the station, and he said exactly what I said. He didn't even embellish it. He said exactly what I said, which is, I think, fine. And my sergeant, being an idiot and not understanding semantics, right, what words mean, he said that I used a racial epithet and that was against the rule, and he was going to have to write me up. And I said, "Do you know what epithet means?" So, I'll tell you what, let's find a dictionary. So we found a dictionary, and I looked it up, and I said, "Look, saying the words, if you're going to play the race card against me, I'm going to leave," that is not a racial epithet. That is in no way disparaging to him or his race. It wasn't meant as any kind of slight. It was talking about the manner in which he was speaking to me, not vice versa. So what is the issue here? So then his wife called and was like, "That officer was awesome," and blah, 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 blah. So I ended up, having to go to internal affairs and explain the whole situation. And of course, they threw the whole thing out. So that kind of thing happens a lot. But while I'm talking to him, they go through my jacket and they go through a bunch of arrest reports, and they are talking to people, and they are going to seek out, has he ever said anything? I mean, he's a white cop that works the projects. Has he ever used any kind of word? That's confirmation bias, right? It's been reported that I'm a racist at this point, and so they are going out to confirm their belief. Their belief at that point is, yes, he is. We're going to find evidence of it. And that's not how an investigation should work, right? You should investigate this issue and find there is no merit, and I understand why it was brought before us, but this was just a misunderstanding, and this officer has done nothing wrong, and that's it. So confirmation bias is it's a really bad thing for investigators, right? I mean, you're doing a homicide investigation. Oh, I got a story for you. This is honest to God, hand to God, swear on my children, absolutely 100% true, right? It doesn't sound like it will be. I get a call one time that was this adult father who had an adult son that lived with him, and his son was basically a dope fiend. So, poor dad would wake up and the TV is missing, and he would know that his son stole it, went and pawned it for a fix, and then the son would be like, "Oh, I left the door unlocked last night. I wasn't even home. I guess somebody must have stolen it in the middle of the night." I mean, stories are just terrible, right? So they are just at each other's throats, right? Dad is pissed off and wants son out. This happened on January the 1st of 2000 and probably about 9. So we get a call on a domestic dispute. So we show up, and partner and I, a guy named Kelly Foster, and we separate and we talk to each person, and then we meet and we're like, "Look, here's what I got from the son. Look, this is what I got from the dad." We got a good, robust picture of what's happening. So we're like, okay. So we explain to the dad, "Look, I get it, right? I mean, you have every right to be angry, but as far as kicking him out, you don't have the authority to do that because he's on the lease. So, you're going to have to file paperwork to get him evicted. Um, we explain the process of how to go through the eviction process and go through the courts, and then a constable comes out and they will actually physically remove him from the premises, but he has 90 days. And for the next 90 days, I mean, he can kick in the door and sit on the couch and you can't do anything. And if you put hands on him, well, then that's a family violence assault and you get in trouble. And that's no good either. So, and he was like, well, I'm just going to kill him then. And we're like, la, 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 la. Well, you didn't say that. We didn't hear that. I know you're just angry. You don't mean it. So listen, this is all we can do. And I'm sorry. I know you want us to do more, but we simply can't, right? So it's a civil issue. There's been no real crime committed. So we're going to go. So we leave. And it sucks, right? You want to help the guy, but there's just nothing you can do. Like, your son sucks. So you need to kick him out, and that's going to be a process. So I'm sitting in the parking lot of this apartment complex doing the report real quick. My partner's already left, and the tone comes out on the radio letting you know there's like a code 3 emergency, right? So stop what I'm doing, I turn the radio up a little bit, and a shooting call comes out at that place that I'm at. And I'm like, I don't think that's, and you gotta remember, this is the day after New Year's, right? So fireworks, we're getting a lot of fake, guns, gunshots in the area kind of thing. So I'm just thinking, I didn't even hear anything, so I'm thinking nothing happened. So I get on the radio and I'm like, hey, I'm still code 6 at that location. I didn't hear anything. I'll get out and check it out. But this is the apartment we just left, so I'm not sure what's happening. So I walk around the corner. I come through the breezeway, and there's a little small crowd, right, about 10 people standing around. And I see somebody laying on the ground, which is the son, and I see Dad standing there. And I'm not exaggerating. It's cold in Dallas, right? January 1st, it's not snowing that particular day, but it's freaking cold. He's got a gun. It's literally smoking. So I round the corner with the dad that said, I'm going to kill him. He's got literally a smoking gun in his hand, and the son is laying down, and there's a crowd. And that was weird that there's a crowd around a guy with a gun, right? Nobody seemed to be concerned that usually a guy with a gun shoots somebody, everybody runs, right? So it was a little strange. So I run up, gun drawn. I'm like, drop the gun. And he's like, no. And he dropped it right away. He goes, I didn't do it. What do you think? You think he did it? He just got done saying, I'm going to kill him. He was angry, right? And 5 minutes later, here he is with a smoking gun, right? So, I get him cuffed, and everybody, there's so much going on, right? And you're trying to maintain a scene. You're wondering if, what do I need to do for this, do CPR or anything that I can do to help this guy that's been shot. So I get him cuffed up. I get him in the car. We get more people out there. We sort of sequester all the witnesses. And we start working through the scene. And as it turns out, he actually didn't do it. What happened was, son owed money to a dope dealer. Dope dealer came to collect. When he came to collect, he saw 2 cops standing on the front porch. And so he just chilled over here in a different breezeway for a little while till we left. As soon as we left, Dad kicked out son. He agreed to leave. He goes out, closes the door, locks it, even though we told him he shouldn't do that. And son goes to walk across the courtyard, looks up, sees the dope dealer that he owes money to. Dope dealer comes up to him. They get into a tussle. Bad guy pulls out a gun. Son is able to get that gun and wrestle it away from him. And while he's trying to wrestle it away, it goes off and he gets shot in the stomach. But he still manages, even though he gets shot, to take the gun. Bad guy's like, oh, I lost my gun. I'm out. So he takes off running. People come out because they heard the gunfire. Son falls down on the ground. Dad comes out because he also heard it, right? And he sees son. He walks over to see what's going on. And he's confused. And he picks up the gun. And that's when I round the corner. So, you can't ever take anything at face value. You have to question everything. You can't have this confirmation bias about pre-existing beliefs, right? You still have to break things down to the nth detail to really know what you have. And the reason I remember that call so well, and I'll never forget this, there's the bow on the story to that particular story. We're sitting there, we kind of got it figured out at this point. We're waiting on homicide to come out so they can officially do what we've already kind of done for them. And there's this weird silence. This guy just lost his son after the day that he's had everything. And a good 5 minutes of silence goes by, and all of a sudden the dad pipes up, officer, can I ask you a question? And I'm pouring with empathy at this point, as I was kind of a new officer, so I was like, still liked people. And I was like, yeah, buddy, what can I answer for you? He goes, Well, being that it's the first of the year and my son was here this morning, can I still claim him on my taxes? So, true story. Swear to God, he really said that. So, yeah, the depravity of the human condition is just beyond measure. All right, so hindsight bias leads you to believe that an event was predictable, even though it wasn't. So, you're dating somebody, and then ultimately they cheat on you, and you're like, I should have known, right? Well, sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes there's red flags, and maybe you've caught them doing things that were along those lines, and then they finally go all the way, and you catch that. So yeah, sure, you probably should have cut ties a little earlier. But I mean, sometimes there's just no way to know, right? And we don't like to feel bad about that happening, so we tell ourselves, well, we should have known, right? We should have known that would happen. We take the blame. So this is kind of a dangerous thing. You see this a lot in therapy, people talking about things that they should have known, and you're like, there's no possible way you could have known that, right? I know we did one counseling session with a lady that bought a really expensive car, and then right after she bought it, she lost her job, and it put her in a really bad situation financially. She couldn't get out of the car. She was upside down in it. And she's like, I should have known that I shouldn't have bought that car. And I'm like, you've been in the same job for 15 years. You've never been written up. They weren't doing rounds of layoffs. As far as you know, your company was doing rather well. And also they got bought out, and you had no idea that they were for sale. And the people that bought out laid a bunch of people off and put their own people in. I mean, there's just nothing it's just bad luck. I mean, you could not have known that was going to happen. You purchasing that car was fine. It went along with your budget and all of the things that you knew to be happening at the time. So you cannot blame yourself for this particular situation that you're in. Again, it's just bad luck. So be mindful of that. Always kind of question, are there things that you should have picked up on? And if there are, fine, learn from them, but don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up over them. Representative bias, faulty way of thinking in which you unintentionally stereotype someone. We're all probably guilty of this. I mentioned earlier, people talk a certain way, and I instantly think, yep, I don't want to know them. I don't want anything to do with them. I don't want to surround myself with people that, I ain't got none of that. I don't like that. It's not a color thing. I don't care what color you are. I've known plenty of Hispanics that talk that way. I've seen white people that talk that way. I just don't. I've worked too hard to learn how to speak and write to be around that and then digress, go the other direction. I don't want that for myself. So, I prefer to surround myself with either people that are more like me, like-minded, or just nobody at all. But is that fair? No. I mean, that's probably not fair. So this representative bias is not particularly a good thing, but we all are guilty of it to some extent. All right, let's talk about intelligence. So, shifting gears a little bit, last part of the chapter here. Intelligence is an individual's ability to understand complex ideas, to adapt effectively to the environment, to learn from experience, not making the same mistakes over and over again, to engage in various forms of reasoning. So we've talked about all these different ways to problem solve and think things through and all that. So it's that ability. And to overcome obstacles through mental effort. So we all come to situations where, we came to one last night. I talked about, I had a bad night at work last night. They ordered all these mattresses, and these big boxes that are filled with a mattress. Apparently you take the rolled up vacuum sealed mattress out and you unroll it, and then you open the vacuum seal and the mattress goes. I saw a video of it, but we have like pallets of boxes of mattresses. It's a very strange thing. So apparently they're very flammable, and they have to be stowed on shelves that have particular sprinkler systems. So they didn't know that when they ordered them, and now we're out of space with the sprinklers. Anyway, we have all a million open shelves, but we can't put these mattresses on those shelves. So now what do? We got all these pallets that have 4 boxes with 4 mattresses, and we can't put them anywhere. So they stuck them all on the very end in this one zone that's not being used, and there's too many of them. And they couldn't figure out what to do. And I was like, why don't you stack them on top of each other? I mean, this building is 5 stories tall, and there's got all that space above it. There's no rack over here, but we can still stack these pallets. I mean, you can't hurt them. They're boxes of rolled up mattresses. And they're like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. And it blows my mind that nobody thought of this very simple solution, right? So, am I bragging? Maybe a little. But let me tell you a story about how dumb I can be. So, the problem with intelligence, right, is when you have it, it's not always a blessing. Sometimes it's a curse. So, one time I dated this girl, and she moved into this house. It was kind of a piece of crap, dilapidated, falling apart, basically dope house. And this is when I was young, super young. I was like 18. And I wasn't handy. I don't know how to build things, right? I never took wood shop, and I never built anything, right? So they put new carpet in this house, and it was dragging on the floor. Every time she would try to open the door, it was a big, fluffy, thick carpet, and it was like... And she's like, I need to fix that. And so my thought was this. Yeah, that door needs to be raised up, right? I'm scraping the floor, so obviously I have to raise it up. But how do you raise up a door? I don't know how to do that. So I took the door off the hinges, and I cut a little bit. I borrowed some tools from my dad, and I never used a circular saw before, so I had to figure out how to use a circular saw on some scrap wood, and I got decent at it, so I cut some off the top of the door, and then I went to rehang it. Well, now I got to put the hinges, right? So I moved the hinges down an inch, re-drilled holes for that, and put the hinges on, and raised the door up, and now the door handle doesn't match with the door frame. So I had to figure out, well, how do I do this, right? So I took the handle out, I re-drilled the latch, and then I moved the handle down an inch, but now the holes are kind of overlapping, so I had to take wood putty, and I had to figure out, okay, well, I cut a little half moon of round wood to put in the top of that, and then I wood puttied the hell out of it. So now I have the hole here and the hole here. It took me all day, and I rehung the door, and it worked perfectly. And I was so proud of myself because I'd never built anything before. And this girl that I was dating was kind of an idiot. And I don't say that to be mean. Yeah, I do. She was a horrible person. So anyway, so she was kind of an idiot. So she comes home, and I was so proud. And I was like, look what I did. Look what I figured out how to do. And she looked, and she goes, why didn't you just cut an inch off the bottom of the door so it would stop scraping? I never thought of that. It never even occurred to me. My first thought was this needs to be raised up. And this is all the steps that has to be done in order for that to happen, right? So intelligence is a double-edged sword, right? Can smart people make dumb choices? Living proof of that, time over, and over and over again, right? Lots and lots of bad decisions. Intelligence is all of these things: the ability to adapt, to understand complex ideas. But there's that saying, right? Book smart people have no street smarts, they have no common sense. Well, think about that. If you're a highly intelligent person, you don't think commonly, right? I was trying to utilize my intelligence that I knew I could solve this problem, and so the first solution that presented itself was very complicated, but I'm not afraid of that, so I tackled it in a complicated way. Somebody else might have looked at that and thought, no, that's too complex. What's a simpler solution? I thought of a simpler solution. And again, that comes with time and experience, and I was young and, not experienced. So, now I've learned to kind of step back and look at it from different angles. But yeah, it's always interesting to me that, people that are very intelligent are expected to just never make mistakes, never make bad decisions, and they're expected to know everything. You take somebody that's got a PhD with a high level of intelligence on top of that, because by the way, those two things are not synonymous. I know people with average IQs that have a PhD, all right? It's not an indicator of how intelligent you are, how educated you are. Those are different things. You can be very educated and average intelligence. You can be highly intelligent and have no college degree whatsoever. So please don't equate intelligence with education. Now, there is a correlation. Remember, we talked about correlations not implying causation. Education does not cause you to be intelligent. And having high intelligence does not cause you to seek education all the time. But they usually are correlated, right? Which makes sense. Educated people typically learn through education various problem-solving methods, various ways to engage problems and learn from experience, and all the things that are in this definition. So, difference between education and intelligence. There is a difference between intelligence and IQ. These two words are not synonymous. Okay, intelligence talks about your ability to do all these things that are in that definition, right? Where did that come from? Well, Charles Spearman, back in 1927, kind of coined the term G factor, which sounds really kind of ghetto fabulous now, right? Like, yeah, G, right? So the G factor stood for general intellectual ability. And what he found was that people that are usually smart in one area tend to be sort of overall smart for everything. So people that are highly gifted in, like, say, music, right, are very intelligent kind of across the board. People that have very good way with words tend to be very intelligent people. Good writers means very smart people. Mathematicians, they're really good at math, really smart overall. Map makers, people that are really good spatially with spatial orientation, generally speaking, are more intelligent than your average person. That was his findings. Most people don't believe in that now. It was probably, I'm going to guess, it might have been more true for his time in his era than it is today. But generally speaking, we have what's called multiple intelligence, multiple areas of intelligence. I am really high in some, very average in others. And that's pretty typical. Most people don't score like off the charts across the board. I mean, even Einstein probably would not be maxed out on all the different types of intelligence. There were certain ones that he, of course, broke the test. I mean, just through the roof IQ. But the rest of them, he's probably high, but not like overly so. So G factor is the general intellectual ability, and it's really not talked about too much more anymore. This is the DO double G factor. I thought that was hilarious when I put that on there, and I think I have a test question about that, so be careful. That's Snoop Dogg, by the way, DO double G. All right, theories of intelligence. Howard Gardner is a Harvard psychologist. Still, I think he's still at Harvard now, as a matter of fact. He developed this notion of multiple intelligences, and he sort of changed what we looked at as far as intelligence because he added stuff on here that previously wasn't really tested for. So if you look at your common IQ test, right? So IQ, let me skip ahead and I'll come back. IQ, here we go. IQ is an index of intelligence originally devised by dividing the mental age by your chronological age and then multiplying it by 100. You don't need to know that formula. But now it's derived by comparing an individual's score with the scores of others the same age. So now enough people have taken this test. We don't have to do this complicated formula anymore. Now we just say, hey, 20,000 45-year-olds have taken this test. And this is the average of what they scored. What is your score comparatively to that average? So that's kind of what we do now. But IQ stands for intelligence quotient. This is your kind of seen as your ability to learn. So your IQ is like your ability to learn, like as a score, right? On an index based on a normative curve. So that's how that's a little different than your intelligence. Your intelligence is your ability. Your IQ is your actual score on a standardized test. So they're two different things. All right, so back to our Harvard guy here, right? He looked at stuff like musical ability, which I think is really smart. I think you look at somebody like Mozart, and let's say that he tested for words and math and spatial recognition, and all these things are on your typical IQ test. Let's say he scored average. Would you say Mozart was average of average intelligence? No, that would be insane, right? The man's a genius, obviously. Even if linguistically he's average and mathematically he's average and spatial reasoning is average, he is through the roof so high above everybody else on musical ability, we have to consider this guy a genius and very intelligent. Same thing with body smarts. People that are highly, highly athletic, your Michael Jordans, your Wayne Gretzky's, your John Jones, your people that set records that stand for decades. They have a kinesthetic sense about them that is highly, highly developed. And that's important to know. People smart. Some people are really good people. These are your famous life coaches, your Tony Robbins, people like that. They just get people. They know how to connect with them. They know how to mentor them and talk to them and understand them. And that's a hard thing to really put your finger on. It's not linguistics. It's not just how they talk to them, right? It's like a feeling. They're empathetic and they understand the plight of certain people. And that's a really important skill to have. You're really good top salesmen, very people smart. Their interpersonal skills are through the roof, right? Cut out for sales. Word smart, this is your linguistic people. This is your M&M, right? I mean, who would think that M&M is a genius? I guarantee you, if you gave him an IQ test, he would test off the charts when it came to word smart. His ability to put rhymes together and words together and all that, I mean, it's phenomenal. And I'm not a ginormous fan of his, other than I recognize the sheer talent that he possesses in that particular skill. Logic smart, your computer scientists are usually very logic smart because they're speaking, the computer language that the computer follows every single thing that you say to do. So you have to be able to break down sort of how a computer thinks and then write to that language to the computer. So there is a certain logic to be followed there. Nature smart, you have some people that are, with the crocodile dude that would Steve Irwin. You have people that are just really, really good farmers. They know how to read the soil, and this is definitely not me. I'm super dumb when it comes to nature smart. I know nothing about that. Self smart, some people have a lot of intuition for themselves. They have a lot of, they're really good with introspection, talked about from chapter 1. Picture smart, some people are just very good visually. Your Annie Leibovitz, photographers like that just have an eye, for that sort of thing. Your Christopher Nolans that are really good visually when they make movies. That would be kind of fall into that. So all of these are sort of the multiple intelligences that Howard Gardner introduced. Some of them are, still like your linguistics. That's been on there forever, but he sort of recategorized them to some extent. Other theories of intelligence that have kind of come and gone. Robert Sternberg had what's called a triarch theory of intelligence. He suggested that there are 3 basic types. So he didn't go with 8, he went with 3. And he said we have analytical, creative, and practical. Analytical or componential. I always have to say that. Componential, it's closely related to what IQ tests were measuring at the time. These are problem solvers, people that can do all of those things that was in that definition, right? They can adapt to the environment, they can learn from experience, they can engage, all that kind of stuff. Whenever I was going through the CIA's hiring process, I probably took about 15 different IQ tests. And they all kind of measured different analytical problems. Sometimes it would be like a box that was like on paper, right? And you could see all the different sides, but they were folded out. It was like 4 squares and then 2 squares look like a T. And it said, if you folded this box up, what would be directly across the cube from the number 1? And so you only have about 10 seconds to see this box 2-dimensionally, and in your mind, fold it up 3-dimensionally, and then look and see where the 1 would sit and what would be on the other side of the cube, and then find that answer and then answer it. And by the way, if 6 was on the other side, just to make it frustrating, they didn't have the answers like 3, 4, 5, 6. It was like the answer for 3 was 2 plus 1. And the answer for 4 was, 5 minus 1. Things like that. So now you have to look and see. That's a certain analytical spatial reasoning skill that you have to figure out the answer to. And then once you get a number in mind, you have to keep it in memory while looking over at this word problem. And now you have to figure out the problem to get the answer that you're still storing in memory, and then know, okay, yeah, it's this answer right here. And you have to do all that in about 10 seconds. So that would be, according to Sternberg, computational analysis. Experiential or creative is reflected in creative thinking and problem solving. These are people that are able to look at a problem and sort of think outside the box, right? They're not sort of trapped by conventional thought. They're able to go outside that and think of things in new ways. MIT is exceptionally good at churning this out. They're really, really good at tapping in to experiential thinking. And so to get into MIT is insane, right? To have everything you need, the scores and the IQ and the SATs and all that kind of stuff to get into MIT. But to stay into MIT, you have to be able to demonstrate this creative thinking. They're not like Harvard and Princeton and Stanford, some of those other ones, right? They're not really, those other Ivy Leagues are not really pushing out the creative thinking, right? They want you to retain a bunch of knowledge. They want you to analyze it. They want you to kind of have your own ideas. It's very difficult, very challenging, but MIT is specifically sort of geared for putting out inventors, putting out for people that create new ways of thinking, new computer languages, new inventions, things like that. So hats off to MIT for that. They're really kind of cornered the market on that. And then the last one is contextual. These are people that have a lot of common sense, street smart. This is your John McCain's, right? Any diehard fans out there representing? So, here he is, team of terrorists, armed to the teeth, and he's running around picking them off one by one. He's not a commando. He didn't have special training, to climb through elevator shafts and vents and do all that kind of stuff, right? But he had a lot of common sense, and in the movie anyway. I know we're talking fiction, but the ending scene, one of my favorite ending scenes of all time, right? He's shirtless, he's got his hands back here, and he's walking towards Hans Gruber, right? And the camera spins around, and duct taped to the back right here, he's got a pistol. I would have never seen that coming in a million years. I would think, well, he's got no shirt. I know he's got no gun. He's unarmed. I can see from across the room he's not armed. But in fact, he was. So that was just a really street smart thing to do. As smart as I am, I probably wouldn't have thought to do that. So he's able to adapt to his environment and kind of overcome. So for some reason, that's the first guy that comes to mind when I think of practical common sense. All right, so here's a couple pictures of smart guys. I'll let you argue which one's the smartest. Remember who gives you your grade. These other two guys are dead. So, measuring cognitive abilities. This is important. I want to touch on this, and I'm getting more lengthy than I wanted to be, so let me go through this. Achievement tests measures what a person has learned up to a certain point in their life. Achievement tests and intelligence tests are not the same thing. They don't measure the same thing. They're not formatted the same way. They're very, very different. So, an achievement test says you are this grade and you have this level of intelligence, which is what you should have. These two tests usually work in conjunction. They're made together. So if you look down here at intelligence test, this Wechsler, it's called the David Wechsler, it's called the WAIS 3. I don't know if they're on the 4 yet. I'd have to look that up. But it's the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. That's what that stands for. This is an IQ test. Now, Wechsler also makes an achievement test. Here's how that works. I'll use my brother as an example. My brother started college a while back and flunked out and thought, well, I just wasn't, focused on it. So he, moaned and groaned for a semester or two, and then he thought, oh, I'm going to try it again. So he tried it again, and he flunked out again. He only took 3 classes. They weren't hard classes. He did do the work, sort of, but not very well, and he flunked out a second time. So couldn't figure out what was going on. So went to a psychologist, and they gave him a bunch of tests to see if he had dyslexia or any kind of learning disorder, and he does not. So that wasn't the issue. So they gave him an IQ test and saw what his score was, and it was, I'm going to say low average, and his achievement test, so he should be achieving low average. Well, what's average? An average grade is a C. Right, so he was basically measuring IQ-wise as a low C student, but passing. Yet he's getting Fs. So they gave him an achievement test, right? Well, your achievement test should also show low average. What it showed was his achievement test was actually a little higher. It was high average. So intelligence and achievement tests were measuring like this. What's going on? So there were a little more digging. Turns out he was just super depressed. And so he was taking these tests depressed. Have you ever tried to take an exam while you're depressed? You don't care, right? There's no kind of adrenaline oh, I got to get the right answer, right? You get pumped up. You get, people get test anxiety because they get overdone. And he was the opposite. He was I don't care, C. I don't care, B, So this all kind of came out because his achievement test and his IQ test were not lining up, and they should, right? If you have this IQ, you should achieve this test. If you have this IQ, you should achieve this test. It just makes sense. If you have this IQ and you're only achieving this, there's a reason for that. Sometimes it's a developmental disorder. Sometimes, most often, it's because, and you see this with gifted students that are in accelerated programs, they're bored. I'm sorry, not before they get into an accelerated program. You have a highly intelligent student and they're in regular level classes. You're not going to keep their attention. They are just going to be bored. They're going to sit there bored, daydreaming, sleeping, doodling, thinking about other things because you're operating at a speed that's too slow for them. My son had this issue, and we got him into all of the gifted and talented classes, and he's a straight A student, and he loves going to school. He loves learning. But he used to hate it. Getting him out of bed in the morning was a pain. Getting him to stay on task was a pain. Getting him to do homework, everything about it was a pain. It was so weird for me because I'm like, I'm all about school. That's what I do for a living, and you hate it, and it's whose kid are you? Well, it turns out he was just that bored. So once we challenged him, that's what drives him. That's what motivates him, is rising to that challenge. So you see this a lot in the school system. So there's two different kinds of achievement tests. There's the norm referenced. This is what measures against an average score in the person's age or education level. So this is what we're taking when we take like the STAR. That's this, right? To a large extent, we're saying every student in Texas that's a fifth grader, or whatever grade you take that in, right, scored this. How do you measure according to that standard? So that's a norm referenced. A criterion referenced. This is when a bunch of like teachers and professionals get together and they come up with what they call TEKS, or your education like specific skills that they expect you to learn. So this is measured against a predetermined standard. They say, this is what we expect you to learn, and you demonstrated a mastery of those things, or you did not meet the standard that we have set. That's a criterion referenced achievement test. So they're kind of both, right? Kind of have both. Now, an aptitude test is a test that predicts future performance. So the SAT is the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and it's supposed to measure your aptitude for college. Fun fact, I was like my son. I was bored. I didn't care about SATs. I had a scholarship for college, so it was already a given. I didn't need the SAT, but I had signed up for it before I got the scholarship. My parents were like, you're going to take it. And I'm like, I don't need it. And they're like, you're going to take it. And I'm like, oh my God, whatever, Mom. So I showed up to the SAT, and I didn't care. And I just penciled in. I didn't even read questions. I'm like, oh, that's too long. I don't care. C. And then I slept through part of it and didn't even answer part of it. So you know what my SAT score is on my official records? Like 740. So here I am with a 4.0 with a PhD and a 4.0 with a master's degree and 3 undergraduate levels. I graduated with honors. But my SAT score would have you believe that I am destined to flip burgers for the rest of my life. So I don't have a lot of positive things to say about aptitude tests. I don't find them to be particularly accurate often. And I think they have too much power. I think sometimes they're very predictive, but I think, what's the harm in letting somebody try? And if they pass, they pass. And if not, they don't. But, to take a test that may or may not be anything like actual college and then say, nope, we're not going to give you a chance to start at our college because your SAT score was too low. I hate that. So ACT is another one. I think that stands for Aptitude College Test. I don't really know that. The GRE is the Graduate Record Exam. So this is supposed to see how prepared you are for graduate school. It's a very different test than the SAT because graduate school is very different than undergraduate work. So it's a lot more writing involved. And then the ASVAB is the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery. This is the aptitude for what job you would be good at in the military. And there's like mechanical tests and analytical tests, and there's all these different things. And when you're done, depending on your ASVAB score, you apply for certain positions like, say, I wanted to be naval intelligence. I thought that would be cool. So I took the ASVAB and I applied for naval intelligence, and you have to have a certain ASVAB score to even apply to that particular MOS. Intelligence tests is I kind of mentioned this, but it's a test of individual differences in general intellectual ability. The gold standard for IQ test is the Stanford-Binet. It's on the 5th edition, I believe, still. Stanford-Binet, it was made by a guy named Alfred Binet, and he went to Stanford University, so hence the name. The SB5 is it's the gold standard. It has hundreds of thousands of people of all age groups that have taken this over the many, many, many years it's been around. So that's called being norm referenced. And up here, the norm reference. And there is no other test that even approaches those kind of numbers. It's more people have taken that than any other test, so you have kind of a very large base of scores to compare to. The Wechsler is probably the number 2, and then there's other tests. There's not just these, right? Other tests. This one's called the Miller Analogies test. That is only looking at one kind of intelligence, really, right? Dog is to cat as cat is to what? Perhaps bird, right? Dogs and cats don't get along. Birds and cats don't get along. There's a natural predator thing here, a natural predator thing there. So your ability to sort of see the relationship between these two things and then come up with a relationship between the second two things, some people are really good at that. Some highly intelligent people, that's just not their forte. They're not particularly good at that. So it would be probably wrong to measure somebody's overall intelligence based on this Miller Analogies test. However, if you look at high IQ organizations like Mensa, they will accept you based on a score and they have a list of about 20 different tests. And of course, the Stanford Binet and the Wechsler are on there. The Miller Analogy test is one of them. Another one that they look at is the LSAT. If you've taken the LSAT for law school aptitude test, that is kind of an abstract thinking enough test. There's no there is a right or wrong answer, but how you get to that answer is very much thinking through and problem solving, and it's not based on just crystallized knowledge. Like, I've been taught this before. You have to think through it and get the right answer, and so they consider that an intelligence test, also on top of an aptitude test. So there's a little bit of overlap sometime with these. This last one is a culture fair IQ test. It's specifically designed to negate the influence of the dominant culture. So don't throw anything at me on the computer. I promise this is just in the research. If you look at average IQs of whites versus blacks, you get about a 10-point difference, which is pretty dramatic. 10 points is quite a bit of difference, right? Now, does that mean white people are smarter than black people? Let me go on the record right away and say abso-freaking-lutely not. That is not at all what I'm saying, nor is it the case. But time and time again, you do see this discrepancy on scores. So where does that come from? Well, the test was written by a very, very white guy at a very, very white college using very, very white examples. So it is very culture specific. So it's not fair for a black person to take this test written by white people and then give them a score based on our norms. How many white people got a certain score, and then a black person comes in from a different culture with a different background. Remember, we talked about the semantics, and the words that they say are somewhat culture slanted toward the way that they speak around their ethnicity. So that's where that comes from. It has nothing to do with actually measuring intelligence. You're kind of comparing apples and oranges. So this culture fair IQ test attempts to sort of negate that, and it asks very standard questions that kind of get away from white culture a little bit. So I haven't looked a lot of them. I don't really know a lot about them, but I want you to know that they exist and that discrepancy of score exists, and why does it exist. All right. All right. I already talked about this. Your average IQ is 100. Right? They've engineered this to being a nice even number. One standard deviation is roughly 15 points. So remember I talked about that 10 points being a lot? Well, 90, if whites are here and blacks are at 90, I mean, that's almost an entire standard deviation different. That's pretty huge. Considering 2 standard deviations makes you go from average intelligence to considered genius. This is the 98th percentile. This is where you have to score in order to get into Mensa. So, yeah, that's pretty dramatic, kind of a big deal. So here is the kind of breakdown that's considered. So where's 100? Right here. So average is 90 to 109. So 50% of the population is hitting there, right? That makes sense. 50% are below that, 50% above. So high IQ is anything from 115 to 129-ish. A little bit of wiggle room. You'll see some different charts depending on who's coming up with the chart. This is not correct. International High IQ Society membership is 124. I don't know what society they're talking about, so I say it's not correct, but I don't know to whom they're referring. I only know Mensa. and it says 130 plus, and that's actually not correct. It's 132. But unless they've come down a couple points, I don't think they have. But you have to be in the 98th percentile, and they don't round to that. So 130 is like the 97.84, I believe, percentile. If you look at the test scoring, so they're not going to take you at 97.84. You have to be 98. In order to get to 98, you need 2 more points. So 132, you finally break that 98th percentile barrier. Highly gifted is 140. To put that in perspective, Albert Einstein was estimated to be around 160, depending on who you talk to. So yeah, 140 is pretty extremely high. This is less than 1% of the population. Last thing here, then there's the nature-nurture debate. What makes you smart? Your genes or your environment? That raged on for years until somebody finally raised their hand and said, maybe both. Maybe your genetics gives you a certain range, right? I don't care. Let's go back to this, right? So let's say genetically, you've got all the connections that you need, right? You've got good myelinated sheaths, right? So those action potentials that are traveling through those neurons. You've got a lot of connections going on, a lot of neural activity. So genetically speaking, you are capable of getting to this 130, but you don't really ever nurture it, right? You don't feed your brain. You're not trying to solve problems and learning new ways of thinking. You're not educating yourself, right? You just don't care. So even though genetically you're capable of this, you only actually achieve down here. This is a big theory, that one I particularly subscribe to. And it is possible that genetically speaking, you don't have those neurological connections. In your developmental years, right, your formative years, the beginning, you were not exposed to a vast array of new things. So you did not form a bunch of neural connections, which allows you to make connections later in life to things that are potentially unrelated, but you're scaffolding knowledge, new knowledge, on top of old knowledge. Well, you didn't get a lot of old knowledge, right? Maybe you were kind of a latchkey kid. You're a single parent that works 3 jobs, and so you're home alone all the time, and you spend all of your time watching TV and nothing particularly educational, and so you're not exposed to a lot of things. Genetically speaking, you're probably only capable, let's say, of being here in this average range. So that's kind of this in a nutshell. Both are important. Genetics does play a huge role in intelligence, but so does your environment. You have to feed that with which you've been given. Last thing here, something called the Flynn effect, kind of interesting. Flynn studied the general increase of intelligence over time. So he looked at these scores and he saw, back in the day, people were scoring way down here, that was much more average. And the average has continued to climb. And he's saying we're getting much more intelligence as a culture over time. And there is some truth to that. But also, this is reflective of the tests, right? The tests needed to be updated. That's why we're on the 5th revision now of the test. You see, we're on this, where do I have it? SB5. So, if we gave this SB5 to people in 1920, they would not have scored nearly as well, right? Because again, there's culture stuff that didn't exist in the 20s, and they're not going to get those test questions very well. So the test is able to sort of grow with the times and be reflective of the times, and it sort of negates this Flynn effect a little bit. All right, last thing here is emotional intelligence. I mentioned that women tend to be better with this. Emotional intelligence, the ability to apply knowledge about emotions to everyday life. Research shows that this is just as important to relationships and careers as IQ. I'm just going to call it like it is. I have a very high IQ. I have a low average emotional intelligence. Sucks, right? It would be great if I had both, right? I'd probably be running something right now. But I don't deal well with people. I tend to get jobs and I'm smarter than my boss, and that doesn't usually go over very well. They don't usually like me because they're threatened by me. I will sometimes call them out because I have no fear. I should have a healthy fear, right? A healthy fear of, I better not say that. I could get fired. I don't care. If I'm right, I'm right. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. And I mean, I'm wrong sometimes, and I don't mind saying I'm wrong, but not everybody's like that. Some people don't like whenever you point out that they're wrong or a decision that they're making is not going to work. And you say, I don't think that's going to work. And they go, what? Why? And you say, well, because this is what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, we're going to do it. And then exactly what you think is going to happen. And then they're mad at you because you had that foresight and they didn't. And so it fosters insecurity. So I don't know how many times I've been in that situation. I've been fired from so many jobs. It's unbelievable. Because I don't know how to politic. I don't know how to, kiss ass, and I don't know how to, kiss up to a boss, and I don't know how to shut my mouth sometimes when I need to. So yeah, I can definitely vouch for this. High IQ is great for certain things, but again, sometimes can be more of a burden than you think. So, don't wish for it. All right, personal aspects include awareness and management of our emotions. It involves expressing emotions appropriately. So again, I feel frustration and I vent that frustration. There's a kid at my job now, and he drives a forklift, and I mean he's like 18, whatever. He's got the blinged out necklace. He wears $300 Air Jordans every single day. It's a different pair of shoes. Dresses really nice as far as money. He's always flashy, right? I'm like, dude, you work in a warehouse. I mean, you're gonna get dirty. Why? I can appreciate that you want to dress that way to some extent, but I mean, I have nice clothes. I don't wear them to work. I wear t-shirts and shorts and tennis shoes to work, and they get dirty. And the other thing that bothers me, the most thing that bothers me, is while he's driving a forklift, he's on his phone. That is a huge no-no. It's a huge safety violation. And the boss keeps seeing it, like the guy that's over me, right? He keeps seeing it, and he's like, hey, you put your phone away. And he goes, all right, my bad. 30 seconds later, his phone's right back out. Why? Because there's no consequence. And it's none of my business. That kid doesn't work for me. He's never really been in my way. I've actually never seen him do anything particularly unsafe other than the whole totality of the fact that he's texting while driving on a 4,000-pound forklift, which is inherently unsafe. But I've never seen him swerve into somebody's path or run something over or whatever. But in my line of thinking, it's only a matter of time before that happens. And as a manager, you should be setting a precedent for other people to not start doing that because they think that it's okay. And now you have an epidemic on your hand. So I went off on my boss yesterday. I'm like, look, I don't understand why y'all are letting Jay stay on his phone all night long. I mean, you've said something to him numerous times. He still does it. He laughs in your face whenever you tell him something about it. And he acts like it's a joke, and you guys aren't writing him up. And I don't understand that. I mean, I'm this close to bringing my Beats headphones and wearing my big-ass over-ear headphones to work because, hey, if you're going to let him do it, then you're going to let me do it. I had like this out-of-body experience all the time. I'm like, what are you doing? You're bitching at your boss about something that really doesn't even affect you, and it's kind of none of your business, and I don't even know if they've written him up. I assume they haven't, but maybe they have. So, yeah, that's my issue with emotional intelligence. I don't often express my emotions appropriately. I probably should have gone and been like, hey, I have a safety concern about this, but I let it get to the point where I was worked up about it, and then I just vented it out. And I had to go back later. Now, to my credit, I had to go back later and I go, hey, look, I'm really sorry. I felt like I was bitching at you, and I absolutely did not mean for it to come across that way, but I'm sure it did. I said, but, it's just really frustrating because I badly want to listen to music while I'm here to make the monotony of this job more tolerable, but I don't because it's the rule, and I follow rules, generally speaking. So, it really bothers me that he's not following the rules and he gets away with it, and I don't follow the rules because I don't want to set that example. Anyway, so, I sort of stepped back for a moment and thought, oh, man, I didn't handle that very well, and I had to step back in and, sort of save face a little bit. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for people that are highly emotionally intelligent because I'm not. Interpersonal aspects include empathy or sensitivity to others' feelings. I think I used to be really good at this when I was a police officer, but the problem with being a police officer and dealing with that level of society constantly is I think inevitably you become sort of cynical, and you see the worst in people long enough and you just start thinking people suck, which is kind of where I'm at. So, my ability to read body language and nonverbal cues, very, very good, probably way better than most. My ability to manipulate the emotions of others, with my psych training, maybe a little, but my ability to feel empathy or sensitivity to others, no. You do dumb things that lead to dumb things, and I don't feel bad for you for making that dumb decision. You should have known better. And that's a horrible quality to have as a human being, right? So, anyway, so that's a little bit about all of this on the exam. Kind of focus mostly, I might ask a question or two based on phonemes and morphemes. Just kind of remember that they fall in order. I tend to ask questions in the order that they're in the slides. I don't like going back and forth. I think that's harder to understand. So remember that phonemes come first, and then morphemes, and then semantics, and then syntax. They kind of all build on one another. If you remember them in that order, then you'll remember this one's for letters, this one's for words, this one's for sentences. So you might see a question or two on that. Probably not a lot here. A little bit on heuristics, what that is. This is an old theory that's not really followed anymore. So, from a historical perspective, you might see one question. You will see a couple of questions on the differences between these tests. Probably not a lot there. Know the difference in definition. Just be able to recognize the definition between IQ and intelligence, right? This is an index. The other one is an ability. And that's pretty much it. Sorry this went long. Again, I should not drink a Red Bull before I do these videos. So I'm going to stop this one now, and I'll get to working on 11, which is my favorite one. I'm going to give you fair warning. 11 is probably the longest one of the entire class. So we're probably looking at 2 hours. For those of you that are sticking through these videos, my hat's off to you. You obviously care about something. For those that are skipping through it, I don't blame you. They're pretty long, but I only know how to lecture this material based on the amount of time I spend in class. I don't really know how to skip through it very well, obviously. So, again, thanks for sticking through it, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a good day. Bye.